Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
As we keep the beat on geopolitics and some important developments over the Christmas holiday that you might just now be hearing about, including U.S. strikes against Nigeria, striking ISIS targets in Nigeria. And now, of course, this potential meeting that sounds like, well, I should say potential breakthrough. It sounds like a real meeting. President Zelensky will be at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday to meet with President Trump. And we cover all of this with Laura Davison, Bloomberg Washington Deputy Bureau Chief, who's with us now in our Washington Bureau. Laura, let's start with Nigeria and what was behind this. The president, the administration has been talking about attacks against Christians in Nigeria. Is there any evidence that this has been an issue, and who did we target?
So the targets were these Islamic State sites in Nigeria, in the northern part of the country. Trump, for several weeks and really months now, has been talking about persecution of Christians, attacks on Christians in the country, and that Islamic State is particularly targeting them. The Nigerian government has pushed back strongly on the notion that Christians in particular are being persecuted, saying this is, that yes, terrorism is a problem, but that both Muslims and Christians are being affected here. And the Nigerian government actually worked in concert with the U.S. government in these strikes and are working for more strikes to come, as we heard from the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Okay,
so ISIS then remains a problem for Nigeria, but the attacks on Christians is where they draw the line. Is that fair to say?
Yes. So they're united in sort of the actions, the military actions that are being taken, but the motivation behind them is where the U.S. and Nigerians are singing from different songbooks.
Yeah, multiple strikes, the president said. We don't have a readout on exactly what was targeted, how many aircraft were involved, et cetera, from the Pentagon?
Correct. We have very few details on exactly what the sites are, that, who may have been killed, the number of sites, and, what weapons were used, et cetera. So that's all very cloudy. Really, all we have is essentially a tweet, a social media post from the president saying this happened.
At least something. I don't know what we're going to hear about Ukraine this weekend, Laura, but it's pretty important. It looks like Volodymyr Zelenskiy will be in Florida to sit down with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Trump has said, unless there's an agreement at hand, unless there's a deal here, he has no reason to meet with Zelensky. Does that mean we're on the verge of a breakthrough?
It would certainly suggest that there's some forward momentum. What we heard from even Zelensky, a couple days ago was that he was not optimistic for a deal. He said it didn't sound like the Russians wanted to negotiate, and that there had been all of these, these talks between U.S. officials and Ukrainian officials and U.S. officials and Russian officials, and just it seemed like we're at a stalemate. There was no progress being made. Something must have changed over the past couple days, and now Zelensky's headed to the U.S. So it's not clear from the Russian side that they are really, open to negotiating, open to this deal. They are still wanting some of these land territories that, that Ukraine still controls.
Amazing stuff, Laura. Thank you very much. Laura Davison will likely be editing stories about that visit come the end of the weekend, so it's something that we'll keep a close eye on. And we want to add the voice of John Herbst, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and Uzbekistan, is with us right now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to see you. Will President Zelensky be walking into the Lion's Den here in Mar-a-Lago, or a room where he could, in fact, strike a peace deal?
Joe, thanks for having me on. It does seem that there has been substantial progress in negotiations between the United States and Ukraine, which is not surprising because Zelensky has said yes to 5 or 6 Trump proposals for ending the fighting, whereas Putin has rejected every single one of those. What's not clear is what the Russians are up to.
Well, that's been a big question all along. And as Mitch McConnell has said not that long ago, Putin's been playing President Trump since January. Do you see that being the case, or could he, in fact, be about to turn position on this as well?
We've seen Trump in the nearly 11 months, actually it is over 11 months now since he's returned to the White House, take periods where he's been very tough on Zelensky, and then periods when he's been moderately tough, only moderately tough on Putin. And since he put the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, which was sometime in middle of October, he began to put pressure on Zelensky, and that's continued. But Zelensky, while conceding some things, has also stood tough on others. And what seems to have happened in the last few days is Zelensky's agreement to perhaps hand over not to the Russians, but to demilitarized economic zone, areas in western Donbas which are strategically valuable, which the Russian army has been unable to take. But he's insisted, and this is new, and the U.S. seems to have agreed, that Russia must pull back equally from the areas that it controls in Donbas. And what Zelensky has insisted on, it seems that the U.S. has agreed, that there has to be serious military forces. So we're not talking about peacekeepers from the global south in that area to prevent future Russian aggression. And what Trump seems to have conceded on, too, which Zelensky has long sought, are clear guarantees, security guarantees from the United States ratified by the Senate. And now, according to what's in the media, which we can't be certain is accurate, but if it is accurate, it's interesting, the U.S. side has seemed to agree. So we've seen some serious movement by both Ukraine and the United States in the past week or so. Again, what we have not seen is any indication of Moscow's willingness to compromise.
What you mentioned what could happen in the Donbas, and I realize that could take on a couple of different forms. Is a demilitarized zone off the table at this point?
Well, it seems that the demilitarized zone is very much on the table. But the Russians had insisted, and still have not changed its position. Ukraine gives to them territory the Russian army has been unable to take, and the Russians give nothing back in return in Donbas. What Zelensky has insisted, and apparently the United States has agreed, is if Ukrainian forces are moving back in western Donbas, the Russian forces have to move back at least a comparable amount, and as to keep that as the demilitarized territory. So that's a serious concession. And again, if the U.S. has agreed there have to be troops, serious troops, in that area, in that demilitarized zone, international troops, to prevent further Russian aggression, that would seem to be another element of compromise from Team Trump.
All right. So you sit down at Mar-a-Lago and talk peace. Does that mean that Vladimir Putin also needs to sit down with President Trump? Will they get back to this idea of meeting in Hungary?
Well, I don't know where they'll meet, but I assume if Zelensky and Trump are satisfied after their meeting, then there'll be some form of reach out to the Kremlin. Now, according to the media, Kirill Dmitriev, who's the Putin envoy, was in Florida this past week. And so he apparently has reported back on roughly the terms that have been reached between the U.S. and Ukraine. And the Russian reaction has been interesting. They haven't rejected it. They've praised Trump's efforts to achieve peace. They said they're willing to continue to negotiate. But things Putin said as recently as a week ago would not allow the sorts of ideas that Zelensky and Trump seem to be agreeing on to be accepted by the Kremlin. But again, we'll see. Putin has been meticulous about trying to avoid annoying Trump, albeit without conceding one little bit. At some point, he may not be able to do the two things together.
To what extent is President Zelensky trying to head off the constant communication between Steve Witkoff and Moscow, whether he's talking to Putin or his lieutenants? Is that why he needs to get to Florida right now?
Well, I think that the plan that was given to Zelensky by the Secretary of the Army Driscoll in the middle of November was far too favorable to the aggressive, to Putin, and reflecting, I think, Kremlin influence on parts of the Trump team. But that was corrected, within a few days when Rubio met with the Ukrainians in Geneva. Rubio and Witkoff met with the Ukrainians in Geneva. And since then, we've seen a back and forth of ideas. And we've seen Ukraine being willing to compromise, but not to make fatal mistakes, like simply giving Ukraine highly strategic land in western Donbas without security guarantees, without any requirements from the Kremlin to actually make peace. And again, the deal that has been emerging, again, we only have some of the details, we don't have enough, suggests that the United States has taken account of this. And this reflects, again, Ukraine's ability, Zelensky's ability to advocate for their positions, and Team Trump's willingness to listen to them. And that's a good thing.
Really fascinating. What does China make of all of this? What is President Xi watching in Ukraine?
Well, Xi is watching intently American policy in this war. He doesn't want Russia to lose. And by lose, I mean Russia not being able to take effective political control of Ukraine. which is why she has provided significant support to Putin, albeit trying to avoid American red lines, like by sending weapon systems to Russia. But he wants he wants to see America allow Putin to win in Ukraine, because that would be a sign of great weakness, which she would, you might say, interpret as meaning he has a free hand to go after Taiwan.
We are spending some time with former ambassador to Ukraine and Uzbekistan, John Herbst, ahead of this meeting at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday between President Zelensky and Donald Trump. You know, Trump said he would end this war on his first day, Ambassador. Is there a chance he ends it in his first year?
No. The only way this will end is if Putin understands the United States is determined, that Trump is determined to achieve his stated goal of a durable peace. Not a peace which enables Putin to come back from war of Ukraine in 6 months or 12 months or 36 months. But the only way to do that is to make it extremely painful for Putin to continue. Because for Putin to have effective political control of Ukraine, he has to take a great deal more of Ukrainian territory, including Kyiv and Dnipro and Odessa, which means a lot more fighting. The only way that Putin understands he cannot achieve those objectives is if Trump puts serious pressure on him in three forms. One, greater sanctions, more of what Trump did in October, meaning the sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, two major Russian oil firms. Two, major weapons supplies to Ukraine. Under Trump's view, it doesn't have to be paid for by the American taxpayer, but the Ukrainians and the Europeans will pay for it. Three, the United States should work with our European allies at making sure the $300 billion, roughly, of frozen Russian state assets in the international financial system go to Ukraine. One of the bad proposals that was presented to Zelensky in the middle of November, reflecting undue Russian influence, was that Ukraine would get $100 billion of those assets, and the U.S. and Russia would get the majority of those assets. That was not a good look. That suggested to Putin that the Trump team was not going to be tough.
With the potential of much more fighting ahead, former Ambassador John Herbst, we thank you for the insights.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I want to add the voice of Jane Harman, the former Democratic Congresswoman, who, of course, was ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. Jane, Merry Christmas. It's great to have you. Glad you could join us today. I want to just step back to this looming meeting with President Zelensky. Are we going to see a breakthrough this week, or is Lucy about to pull out the football again?
Put me down as a pessimist, Joe, and a super pessimist about the meetings with Israel. I'm a pessimist because I don't see that Putin will be satisfied with this deal. I give Zelensky enormous credit for working on it and for, it seems to me, so far as I can tell, ridding his top levels of government of corruption. I mean, that was a big blow to him. And I give the Ukrainian people even more credit for putting up with 4 years of war. They are Ukraine's strongest weapon, the Ukrainian heart. But what does Putin get out of this? Maybe, something like North Korea, South Korea with some kind of a policed border. He doesn't get much new territory. He certainly doesn't get an open door to take over Europe, which is something he might be after. And I don't see it. Mitch McConnell said that Putin has been playing Trump since January. I agree with Mitch McConnell. But the other point here is that Europe has now promised some additional aid. Imagine this, the defense bill that Congress passed, Congress did something, contains hundreds of millions of dollars of aid for Ukraine. So if Trump lets that go forward, please lets that go forward, and doesn't do any kind of stuff to our intelligence capacity that really helps Ukraine keep its, at least keep parity with Russia, this can go on longer, and maybe Russia will be worn down more. Let me talk about the Middle East for a minute, because I don't see anything going on there. Bibi Netanyahu just announced new Israeli housing in the West Bank. Now, that's not Gaza, but it is enormously provocative. He has said he will not recognize two states. And I thought a cornerstone of increased involvement or ongoing involvement by the Arab neighborhood was a path to two states. So even if there is some kind of a police force type thing, as your commentator pointed out, Hamas is not gone. Hamas won't want to be gone. And I just don't see how that gets anywhere. There, I'm a really super pessimist.
All right, so we've got two pessimistic cards here. You said that Putin's been playing President Trump since January. Is Netanyahu also playing President Trump?
I think so, yes. I think that Trump is tougher with him than former President Biden was ever able to be. And Trump has still kept his strong support from many in the pro-Israel community. But I think that Netanyahu is a hardline conservative, would understate it, a hardline, maybe reactionary Israeli, and hasn't budged here. He did get the good news is, and Trump helped with this enormously, got the prisoners back and got sadly the bodies of the deceased back. That's great. But I don't see Hamas willingly move out, and I don't see major efforts to improve the quality of the Palestinian leadership, such as it is. So I don't see how you put money into developing, I guess, what Trump's son-in-law wants to be some new beachfront property if there is no stability. I just don't see that moving. And one more thing, Joe. Let's remember that also in the Middle East is ISIS. We bombed ISIS, we the U.S., in Syria recently. Yeah. We're bombing ISIS now in Nigeria. But ISIS is not just a training group on the ground. ISIS is now all over the internet, radicalizing people like those in Australia and maybe some in the United States and Europe in the near future. So it seems to me, if I were President Trump, he hasn't called me lately, but if he did, I would say, please focus on this, Mr. President. It is the most imminent threat to U.S. security.
Well, you brought this up to us. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Jane Harman. And sure enough, the headlines on Christmas, U.S. forces striking ISIS targets in northwestern Nigeria. The president wrote on Truth Social, and he had a lot to say on Christmas on social media. Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists, of which there will be many more if their slaughter of Christians continues. There have been a lot of questions about whether this slaughter of Christians is in fact taking place in countries like Nigeria or even South Africa, which the president had first brought forth in a meeting in the Oval Office with the prime minister, the president of South Africa. We've not received details on this. The military conducted multiple strikes, according to the president, but we haven't heard anything else. Jane, what are we getting into in Nigeria?
Well, I don't think we know. The government has pushed back and said there is no slaughter of Christians. I'm sure some Christians are being killed. Similarly, in South Africa, which is not to praise those governments, but it is to say that this seems to be another campaign pledge, some kind of pro-Christian white supremacy agenda, although that would be tricky in Africa. Why don't we have a strategy for our foreign policy? Why don't we focus on the real threats, the imminent threats to the United States? We've degraded a lot of our intelligence community assets in the United States, and that worries me enormously. And recent articles just talked about how Russia has been able to degrade and invade the cyber protections in Europe. So all of that leads me to believe that people are going to be radicalized on the web. ISIS has a very sophisticated use now of technology, and this is where we need to go, and this is what we need to beef up. And so these random actions around the globe, take Venezuela, if I could just rant on that for a second, nobody is defending Maduro, but nobody was defending the bad guy next door in Honduras either. He was convicted in U.S. courts, and he has now been pardoned. And the new person that Trump supported has just been elected in Honduras. Are we now doing regime change in South America? Why?
Well, let me ask you. I've only got 1 minute left, Jane, and I'm loath to cut you off. If we're striking targets on the ground in Nigeria, will Venezuela be next?
Who knows? I mean, I don't know. Trump has said he might. The sad part, let me just, in my 12 seconds, where is Congress? Where is Congress? Congress just last week defeated 2 resolutions to assert itself on party line votes. Go figure. Why did Congress come back from its long closed for business vacation? Or that's not fair, but closed for business action. Why did it come back? To do
Longest
what?
shutdown in history. Well, they've taken a couple swings at the ball with War Powers Acts, and they haven't gone anywhere yet, Jane. I'm delighted to talk to you. Happy New Year. Let's get back together in 2026 and see where we are.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
As we look back on the year and look ahead to the new year, we wanted to spend some time with Eric Larson, Bloomberg's legal reporter, who we have spent so much time with talking about the Supreme Court over the past year. And we're still waiting for the big one, of course, the Supreme Court's ruling on President Trump's tariff regime. And Eric is with us now from World Headquarters in New York. It's great to see you. Eric, we understand this could be days or weeks away, right? This is an imminent ruling.
Yeah, that's correct. I think some people were even expecting we might get it before, get the decision before the holidays. But no, we are expecting it in the next weeks, potentially very soon. No word on exactly when that will be, though, of course.
Yes. So obviously when it does, first of all, it'll be seismic in the political world. But also when it comes to markets, this could come down a couple of different ways, right, Eric? There are big questions about whether there will be refunds that are mandated as part of this ruling, whether a one-off or something that could take years to repay. How could this take shape?
Yeah, you're right. That's going to be the big question. If, in fact, the tariffs are ruled illegal, I think that all of these companies that have been paying these billions of dollars in tariffs so far are going to demand them back. Some of them have already gone to court to set the stage for that, should it happen. Mm-hmm. And folks who have been watching this closely will recall that when there were the oral arguments at the Supreme Court not so long ago, they signaled that this conservative-leaning court could be leaning toward overturning the tariffs. You know, of course, they didn't say outright what they were thinking, but this is just based on the questions from the judges. So I think people are preparing for that eventuality. Of course, President Trump has also signaled there are other options to try to get other types of tariffs in there through other legal maneuvers, which also could end up being challenged in court. But folks are definitely preparing for the eventuality that they are overturned and they'll demand this money back.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because the White House has made it clear that if the court strikes down the tariff regime on the IEEPA justification, that there will be another and maybe another after that. But that would be preceded by an investigation or review, right? So this could take months before they come back to the plate.
Exactly. These other ways to put tariffs in place involve, as you said, investigations, and some of them have limits to how long they can last and how high they can be. So that's it's not quite as easy as using IEEPA the way Trump has done. No president before him had used that law in that way, and the way that he did use it, as we know, allowed him to put whatever amount of tariffs he wants on any country he wants for as long as he wants. So that's the emergency power that these lawsuits are seeking to claw back, to say that that's not how the law was intended. All the other ways are just going to be more difficult for the president to put these tariffs back in place.
I'm sure there's nothing else on the docket that rises to this level, Eric, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is there anything else that we should be looking at in terms of the court's turn next year? Yeah,
there are some big ones. We still have a decision on birthright citizenship that President Trump is trying to roll that back. Several courts ruled that effort, that executive order limiting birthright citizenship was illegal. We heard arguments at the Supreme Court already. It's another one where there were signals that they might overturn Trump's executive order, but we don't know for sure. That's a huge one. Involves citizenship for potentially thousands of people, babies. We also have some big decisions on state laws banning transgender athletes at schools, campaign finance, and also voting rights, and whether or not efforts to make minority districts, voting districts, are illegal. So there are some other big ones out there.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge year, with questions as well about the legality over the administration's approach to Venezuela. Eric, I don't want to conflate different beats here, because it does seem that if there will be any justification or challenge, this would be in Congress, not in the courts. Is that right?
That's my understanding. I certainly haven't heard of or seen any specific legal challenges around that yet, but it's also early days to see what happens there.
God knows. And Eric Larson has learned. You never know what you're going to be reporting the next day. It's great to see you, Eric. Happy New Year. Thank you for your great coverage in 2025, as always.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
When we come back to Washington in the new year, lawmakers come crawling back from the holidays in a bruising debate over health care premiums that ended this year on Capitol Hill. There are going to be big questions and some fast work required. If lawmakers are going to deal with the expiration of Obamacare subsidies, which, by the way, is just, 4 days off right now, we go over the cliff when we hit the new year. And then, of course, the matter of government funding. That'll be the end of January. If you've listened to this program, you know about this. All the while, two very important deadlines that really could help set the direction for the entire year in Washington when it comes to politics. Maybe not just Washington, maybe the country when it comes to the midterm election cycle. And that's where we start our conversation with our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis is with us, partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Democratic strategist Doug.For, former director for the Office of Public Affairs, the FTC. Great to have both of you with us here. Rick, I don't know your thoughts on this as we look beyond January, but many have suggested that if there's no deal on health care reform, not only might the government close at the end of January, but that could, in fact, be the issue that tips a Republican majority into a Democratic one in the midterms. If politics is national, as you frequently say, will the midterms be decided next month?
I actually think the midterms were decided last month. I really think that the Republicans lost the initiative on health care. We had a chance to get ahead of it and take away an issue for the Democrats. And, when you look at the stack of debt that we've laid on through the one big, beautiful bill, not a very popular bill to voters and not hardly sold by Republicans in the process, we've laid ourselves bare. And so I think if the election were today, you'd have a 40, 50 seat loss. So I think it can improve. But if the Republicans don't do something more aggressive on health care, it just gives Democrats way too big a handle to use to beat up House members and win seats next cycle.
Yeah. Doug, do you agree? Were the midterms decided in December?
Well, I'd like to agree, but I'm always a little nervous about the fortunes of my party. What I will say, though, is that the wins are clearly favorable for Democrats. I mean, they found an issue they can really campaign on in affordability. Obviously, the president does him and his party no favors in the way that they handle a lot of the cost issues in the economy, including health care. But, there's lots of twists and turns left to come. What I will say, though, is I think it's time for the Democrats now to buckle down and not just say, OK, we want to make things more affordable, but show how they plan to do it. And I'll be looking to see which candidates in which races are able to articulate a really compelling policy agenda as they hope to take over at least the House and hopefully the Senate.
Will you be watching New York Mayor Mamdani? He's going to be sworn in just about a week from now, Doug. Does he have the playbook?
Well, he's being incredibly well advised. He's got a great set of transition chairs, including Lina Khan, who's a real policy all-star. Obviously, people like Senator Warren and Senator Sanders and others have been close to the transition, as was reported by the Times today. And I think what they're trying to do is figure out how to deliver on his agenda. And there are a lot of policy options that are available to him that don't necessarily require Albany or the city council to get involved, because there's lots of really strong consumer protection and worker protection rules on the books that they can enforce and signal enforcement to businesses. So I think he's got a really good opportunity to hit the ground running.
I'm not sure how to think about Mayor Mamdani, Rick, after that meeting with Donald Trump. He was going to be the foil, right? This was going to be the enemy of all Republicans for the next political cycle. But now they're shaking hands, laughing together, talking about affordability as if they are partners. Does that change the political prospects for Mamdani in New York?
Well, it's certainly changed the political prospects for Stefanik in New York. I mean, basically that's true. Meeting knocked her out of the race. So he's already delivered a win for the governor at Stefanik's expense. Look, I think all this focus on him is relatively irrelevant. There's virtually nobody outside the boroughs of New York who cast their ballot based on what's happening inside the boroughs of New York. And so, yeah, it's going to be fun because a third of the entire media establishment resides in that jurisdiction. And so everybody's going to be watching what he does. But I know very few voters who are sitting there breathlessly holding their vote to see what he does and then make a decision. So, a lot of steam, but not a lot of fire.
Interesting. You know, Doug, following the elections, the big question was, does Mamdani have the playbook for Democrats, or is it, in fact, the two moderate governors in Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger? And a lot of folks said all of the above, that the Democratic Party, if is going to be successful in the midterm cycle and, in the next presidential election, it's going to have to keep growing the tent. Do you agree?
I do in some ways, and I don't in others. I mean, I think you see Sherrill and Spanberger adopt some pretty progressive economic concepts, from trying to freeze rates at the utilities in New Jersey under an emergency order to an effort to set up a public PBM, which is an entity that's a middleman in pharmaceutical products in Virginia under Spanberger. I think there definitely needs to be a big tent with respect to sort of cultural and social presentation in different districts. Obviously, what works in Brooklyn is not necessarily going to be what works in Nebraska. But interestingly, there's a candidate running in Nebraska with a very similar economic concept to Mayor Mamdani, who's getting a lot of attention and potentially going to threaten the incumbent. So I do think the Democrats have found an affordability message with an economic populism frame, and now they just need to deliver on it. And that's one thing where Mayor Mamdani will be very relevant, because he's set the bar very high, and I expect he'll deliver.
Rick, where's the money going? We're looking at some doozy Senate races, right? Whether it's North Carolina, whether it's Texas, the races in California. We could see some new records this cycle, no?
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time in Texas last week, and Republicans are really looking at what could be an incredibly confusing and also super expensive primary that then leads into an equally expensive general election. North Carolina, as you mentioned, historically a place where a lot of money is spent. No question it's going to be really important to Republicans there in order to sustain their majorities in the Senate. Anybody who thinks the Senate is an automatic Republican domination is wrong. They've got to think through what happens when the bottom falls out if Republican policies aren't widely accepted. And, you know, that's, I think, one of the missing elements. Democrats sort of, kicked off this idea of reassessing their party. They didn't want to make it public because I'm sure it would hurt. But the Republicans have to be equally concerned. Right now, we have some of the highest retirements in history going on in party in power. Why would anybody want to retire if you think you're going to win re-election? And so the reality is this could be a rocky one, but there's no question fundraising and spending records are going to be set in this cycle.
Are Democrats ready for it, Doug, in the financial department?
I'd like to think so. I mean, obviously, I was concerned to see the DNC not come out with their autopsy, and obviously there's still some ongoing infighting in the party. But at the end of the day, I think these folks want to beat Donald Trump. And while there may be some disagreements across issues like economics and other social and cultural issues, I think that the wins are favorable and that the donors will come off the sidelines. I also think you're going to see a lot of small dollar donation candidates do really well, because I think people are really unhappy with the way in which very large and wealthy oligarchs are working with this administration to drive up costs for people. I mean, people are very, very mad. And usually that generates a lot of attention and can generate a lot of small dollar donations supporting candidates who are more on the populist end of the party.
Really interesting conversation. Doug, thank you so much. Of course, Rick Davis, they'll be back with much more as we make our way into the new year. And I appreciate your insights, as always, our great panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. Doug spent time at the FTC as director for the Office of Public Affairs, our Democratic strategist. And great to have you both with us on this day after Christmas.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.